Hello, everybody. Good to see you. Welcome to CEPS. It's great that we could organize this event for the presentation of a very important study. It's a study that tries to, at least on the digital side, try to shift gear or suggest that the EU institutions how to shift gear on the completion of the single market. It's a very complex set of issues that you see already in the visualizations in the study of the interplay between the different factors that would require some additional love and care in order to lead to the completion of the single market and the accomplishment of regulatory certainty, which is absolutely needed, even before we start talking about how the EU deals with the rest of the world, let's say in terms of sovereignty and so on and so forth. So that is something that is very important, and it is the result of a work that we've done separately for several years, but also now in partnership with Sitra. Also, Sitra comes from a legacy of an experience of reflections on how to achieve the digital single market. And for the single market in general, as you see, Eric Filipar is here with us. He's keeper of the memory, the legacy, and the knowledge on the single market. I remember a report that came out a few years ago that was titled, "When is it finally going to be 1992, right?" And and there's a bit, we are in that mode a little bit. And on the digital side, I think we have the overlap between legislation that many of us have been following from the very beginning. And we know that a lot of this legislation has been prepared during the pandemic, for example, and we saw different groups working in different silos without having the possibility of really dealing with each other. Now, today we sit on the need for something that I could define, for those of you that like philosophy, as a Copernican revolution, right? There needs to go from this understanding of how the different pieces of legislation could fit together from the Brussels perspective. Already there is a lot to be done in terms of text, to looking at how these pervasive technologies actually land in the hands of the entities that need to comply with them. And some of this will apply in different ways to different people and different stakeholders, depending on the use case, depending on their role, and so on and so forth. So today is also a busy day for us at CEPS because we started our task force on the Apply AI strategy, and Sitra has also participated. One of your colleagues participated to our meeting on AI and health this morning. I'm going to have one on AI and automotive in 40 minutes, so I'm going to have to go upstairs to open it. But that's the same thing. You know, if you are in a hospital and you need to comply with all the legislation and health related, digital and health related, even if you think about AI, what does human oversight mean to you? What does transparency or fairness mean to you? That's not the same thing that it would mean for a car manufacturer or public administration and so on and so forth. So understanding how we put together the pieces, how we solve some of the inconsistencies and the redundancies, and how do we engineer compliance going forward with the digital legislation is a very important step, because that legislation would then be applied in various ways, creating additional hurdles going forward. So today we have a very important event for the presentation of this study. I'm super excited by the study. I'm super excited by what I will be able to listen to. And that said, I'll shut up and I'll put myself in listening mode and hand over to Tina, who represents Sitra here and is a very, very good colleague and partner with whom we've done already very meaningful work. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and warmly welcome on behalf of Sitra. So for those of you who don't know what Sitra is, so Sitra is a public future fund located in Finland and a quite active builder in societal change. We work with governments, companies, civil societies to turn systemic challenges into practical and scalable solutions like digital single market, for example. And our focus areas are societal growth, Europe's digital future, just to mention a few. And it has been a pleasure to work with CEPS to prepare this report. And it's a pleasure to host this event together.
Thank you very much, Tina. Welcome. And we now give the floor to Elisa, who will chair at least the first part of the meeting. So Lisa, over to you, and thanks for taking the floor and joining us in this meeting. And then we'll move on also with Raquel and the rest of the CEPS team who will and the Sitra team who will deal with the rest of the event. So thank you very much. Please take the floor and help me in a big applause to Elisa.
Okay. Thank you.
I give you the microphone.
Hi.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me, and thank you for having me. My name is Elisa Roller. I have the very pompous title of Director for Prosperity and Competitiveness. I actually liked my title from the previous mandate better. I was the Director for the Twin Transition. And I just thought that sounded a lot cooler than prosperity and competitiveness. But okay, not enough about the titles. I'm here today just to give you a little bit of the background context and maybe to reply to Andrea's point of why this is not a 1992 moment, but perhaps why we don't need a 1992 moment. The One Europe, One Market roadmap, where it comes from, why we thought to put it on the table, and why it's important for you, especially for the digital single market agenda. I think the first thing is that we come from, I mean, when you talk to, and I'm sure the colleagues from DG Grow can tell you, the single market remains a fundamental pillar of why we're all here and why we're all doing what we're doing. Whether you're working on digital or energy or competition policy, it's the fundamental pillar of a lot of the work that we do and why we do it. But I think also the premise behind the One Europe, One Market was a little bit one of the ideas that came out of the Letta report, which said that if we want to push the single market agenda further, we need to have not just an ambitious agenda in terms of implementation, enforcement, new proposals to push to break down the barriers of the single market in the different policy areas. But what he also said is we need to have binding obligations on the co-legislators. I think we didn't go so far with this. We set a roadmap, which is something that has been endorsed by the Commission, the Parliament, and the Council, but we haven't gone as far as a binding, obligations with, what we do have are timelines, which hopefully will be achieved in the current mandate. But I think importantly, the creation of the One Europe, One Market roadmap was not just recognition of what was spelled out in the competitiveness compass last year or the single market strategy last year, where we said, there's so much still to be done on the single market. It's the main driver for competitiveness in Europe. We need to break down the barriers. But I think there were three main factors which drove us to come to this roadmap. The first is the overall competitiveness agenda, which we outline in the competitiveness compass and is very much driven by both the Draghi and the Letta reports. And a lot of the sectoral initiatives that you see in the roadmap, whether it's the Digital Networks Act or the European Product Act or the Public Procurement Act, these are all essential elements to complete the single market, to break down the barriers, to get rid of the cross-border barriers that we may have, the Savings and Investments Union on the capital markets. So all of those are in a way, what Draghi did was he didn't just diagnose the problems, he gave us a lot of the solutions, and this is really the reply for the competitiveness agenda. The second very important area is decarbonization. And you may think, well, why is she talking about this in the context of digital? Actually very important. I mean, if you saw the big tech sovereignty package that we adopted last week, there was also a lot of discussion on things like, energy use of data centers. There's a lot of discussion of if we are going to compete and thrive in the digital side, whether it's on cloud or on quantum, or on AI, we also need to make sure that, you know, we have that self-sufficiency, that we have the energy available to be able to feed all of this very kind of energy-intensive, emerging energy-intensive field. And I think that's one of the key topics which we're all working on, and which is very much reflected also in the One Europe, One Market roadmap. So it's not a coincidence that the ETS review is in there. It's not a coincidence that a lot of the main deliverables on energy and climate are in there, because we see this as going hand in hand with the overall competitiveness agenda, but also with the single market, and breaking down those barriers. Whether it's having you know, an enlarged ETS, which lets us meet our climate ambitions, where we have more solidarity, where we can take into account the different needs of member states, whether it is to have a much more ambitious energy union, where we, you know, decrease our reliance on fossil fuels, whether we electrify. All of this it is very much tied with our competitiveness agenda. The third, I think, factor which drove the One Europe, One Market roadmap is the geopolitical context. And I take you back to the previous mandate, to a very, at the time, it caused a lot of discussion, but it kind of faded a little bit over time. In 2023, the Commission came out with a new communication on economic security. And we talked about the 3 Ps, if you remember. So we talked about protecting, we talked about promoting, and we talked about partnering. And if you look at the One Europe, One Single Market roadmap, it's exactly that. It's about promoting where we need to promote, whether it's cloud, quantum, AI, and building up on our strengths, or maybe areas where we used to have strength, where we no longer have strength, where we need to recover that strength, or areas where we need to innovate a bit further. It's about protect as well. It's about, we see this with the Industrial Accelerator Act, we see it with the tech sovereignty package that came out last week, but on a number of key files, what we're trying to say is it's no longer a world where we can just keep everything open, where we are, you know, where the traditional kind of multipolar, you know, intertwined, globalized market economy can continue to exist. So I think that protection part is something which is very new, because in a way it kind of runs counter to the whole philosophy behind the single market, which is precisely not about protection. So there, I think, is a big challenge for us going forward. How do we reconcile that philosophy of that single market, breaking down barriers, trade, and at the same time protect those industries which need the protection, promote those industries which need the promotion. And then the final P was the partnering. And what we've seen over the last few months, starting with, you know, Mercosur, but we also have, you know, Australia. Today there's an EU-Korea summit. There are free trade agreements being discussed with a number of different third countries. We also see the need for new partnerships. And I think that is certainly one area where a lot of effort has been put in. So if you look at the single market roadmap, it very much reflects those 3 elements that I mentioned: the competitiveness dimension, the decarbonization, and the geopolitical context, and in particular, the 3 Ps of the economic security doctrine. It's not going to be an easy road ahead. We already see, I just had a discussion yesterday with the FISMA colleagues on the Savings and Investments Union, you know, on whether it's market supervision, securitization, or the pensions package, which are really all essential parts of breaking down those cross-border barriers in capital. And here you're starting to see some really interesting new developments. You may have heard of the E6, so the 6 member states who have kind of written to the Commission and written to other member states to say, okay, on supervision, this is what we could offer. This is areas where we could agree. And you know, there's this kind of, in a way, a push to try to achieve still an agreement on some of these files, with possibly now more discussion of the possibility of using enhanced cooperation, which is something that I think 2 or 3 years ago would have been absolutely impossible, to have that sort of open discussion of, okay, if a proposal is considered to be too ambitious for especially council to agree on, would it be possible to go for an enhanced cooperation? So we're starting to see some really sort of new things emerging dans les couloirs, you know, of how things could be done alternatively. We see this now also with the enlargement debate of maybe not a full membership, but a sort of membership with some things. So I think there's a realization that the kind of consensus building way that we have been working over the last few decades has in some areas reached its limits, and that we need to explore new avenues of how we can get decisions taken, done quickly, and advancing on that level of ambition that we want to do. Because what we don't want to see is a rushed one Europe, one market roadmap where everything gets done, the Parliament, the Council, and the Commission go, yes, we have done everything you told us, we told ourselves we were going to do, but then the end result is, you know, texts that are meaningless or are full of holes, or are things which will then create us nightmares in the next mandate, where we will not just have to simplify, deep clean, new impact assessments, whatever, but we will really have to try to rethink how we legislate. The background of all of this is, of course, the simplification agenda. And here we really have tried to push forward the omnibuses, and we have a couple more coming up next week and the week after on energy products and on taxation. But simplification sounds quite simple, but it's actually a lot harder to do. And it's not just the resistance of the co-legislators to change what they're used to. It's also that there's not always agreement amongst stakeholders, whether it's member states, industry, or whoever's affected, as to the extent to which the Commission should introduce changes to simplify legislation, whether it's reporting requirements, whether it's the administrative burden, whether it's what companies have to do. And I remember I was very involved with the very first omnibus on sustainable finance. And half the companies that came to see us said, no, don't change anything, please. We've set up our systems, we're used to it, we like it, don't change anything. And the other half the companies came and said, well, this is terrible, and you don't know how many FTEs I have on this, and to do all this sustainability reporting. So it's not an easy task. Simplification sounds very simple to do, but when you sit down and say, okay, does this work? One person will say yes, and the other one person will say, no, it doesn't. So difficult to do. But in any case, our ambition is there. We adopted a better regulation communication at the end of April, where we announced a deep clean. And for a lot of the single market legislation, for example, on public procurement, we have very ambitious plans in terms of merging the 3 existing directives into one, and also trying to balance, on the one hand, simplification, making it easier for contracting authorities to do their public procurement. On the other hand, introducing things like non-price criteria, things like social criteria, environmental criteria, made in Europe criteria. So these things are sensitive, and it's difficult to find the right balance. I think for your discussion today, and I think Andrea summed it up very nicely. What he said was, you know, it's trying to fit the pieces of the puzzle together. And the work on the digital files, whether it's the tech sovereignty package that came out last week or the Digital Networks Act from a few months ago, but also the work that we have ahead of us, it's very much interlinked with all the elements that I mentioned, whether it's decarbonization, the competitiveness agenda, the geopolitical situation. And it's also very much linked with a lot of the other proposals that we have. I'm leaving very shortly to chair a meeting on the venture capital strategy, which is coming out later this year. And one of the key questions that we have to address in that venture capital strategy is, if we have these ambitions for cloud, for quantum, for AI that we have set out for ourselves in all these proposals and all these strategies, do we have the private financing available to be able to do that? So all of these things are very much interlinked, and know that there are people in the Commission who don't work in silos and that we do try to put the pieces of the puzzle together. Not always easy, but we do that. Anyways, thank you very much for having me today, and I wish you a very interesting discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Elisa. You mentioned exploring new avenues. So let me and Raquel shortly describe our report, and let's see if this could be one avenue to explore Europe's digital future. So as we know, much has already been written about digital single market. So one can wonder why we decided to prepare another one. And I just would like to highlight that we didn't start it from the scratch. Instead, our report builds on all the earlier work, including Letta's, Draghi's, Niinistö's report, etc., everything what CEPS Sitra has done earlier. But it extends the analysis in two important ways. First, it maps the key bottlenecks as an interconnected system, and by looking at the key bottlenecks together, it's easier to see how the bottlenecks reinforce each other rather than acting in isolation. And when looking at this interconnected system, it's also easier to understand why isolated recommendation or attempts trying to fix them are not working. Second, it translates this diagnosis of why digital single market is not working properly into concrete priorities and recommendation. And I would say that this recommendation part in our report is quite comprehensive, and Raquel will later talk more about that. But actually, we started this work early this spring. We worked together with law firm Bird & Bird and analyzes all the key reports and studies done between 23 and 26. And we analyze what are the key bottlenecks mentioned in those reports, and we map 10 most important bottlenecks. And now let me briefly introduce the most significant bottlenecks related to digital single market. So now we are talking only digital single market, we're focusing only digital part of the single market. So the first 5 bottlenecks are related to regulation, proper guidance, and digital infrastructure. And the bottleneck number 1, we call it a fragmented and overlapping regulation across member states that increases the compliance cost and makes cross-border activities much more complex, especially for small and medium companies. Bottleneck number 2, different national implementation and gold plating. So member states add further complexity for companies. Bottleneck number 3 excessive administrative burden and duplicative reporting that processes slow down firms, and all these bottlenecks are interconnected to each other, like I mentioned. So moving forward to bottlenecks number 4, a lack of clear and timely guidance that creates for companies either risk of over or under compliance, and also delays market entry and reduce investments. Bottleneck number 5, fragmented digital infrastructure and poor interoperability, meaning that the European Union is lagging behind its 2030 digital decade targets. So these are the first 5 bottlenecks. And let me move forward to the last 5 bottlenecks that are related to skills, data, permitting processes, and finance. Bottleneck number 6, skills shortage and barriers to labor mobility, including talent caps and non-recognition of qualification. They are a huge amount of different jobs qualification across member states. Only 8 of them has been regulated that doctor is doctor in every single member state. So that's a huge single task, to mention one. Bottlenecks number 7, barriers to data flows, inconsistent rules, especially around GDPR, interpretation, and district legitimate data use. And if we would like to train European AI models and increase the European AI startups, so large data sets would be needed for training European AI, as you know. Just wanted to highlight that. Bottlenecks number 8, slow and complex permitting and certification processes with significant variation across member states. So I had a chat with Finnish companies, and they meant big companies, and they mentioned it's easier for them to increase their business in the stage because one language, one regulation across the whole huge country instead of Europe with 27 national regulation and even local interpretation of that. Bottleneck number 9, a limited access to finance, which leads, as you know, that many companies, many European companies, especially scale-ups and innovative firms, seek funding outside the European Union and quite often in the stage. Last bottlenecks, a lack of support and coordination in research and innovation. As an example, I would like to mention limited collaboration between academia and business. So these are the bottlenecks we identified together with the Law for Bird and Bird, where we analyzed the key studies and reports made in 23 and 26. And how to fix our bottlenecks. Over to Raquel.
Yes, so just in 4 minutes, because we already have our speakers here, and we need to wrap up quite soon. So basically what we have done in the report jointly with Reijo, Anio, Paul Timmers, and also Artur Bokukci, which are not here, jointly with Tina and myself, we have organized our policy recommendations into 4 main policy boxes. The first one is use digital, the second one is control digital, policy leadership, and then simplify digital. As for the first recommendation, which is use digital, and by the way, you already have the publication published on both the CEPS and Sitra websites in case you want to have a look at it, and you will also have the QR code here in the slides. As for use digital, what we focus on is on the need to generate demand, so European digital firms can scale. And we have organized policy recommendations into 4 main policy ideas, even though when you read through the report, you will see more recommendations. The first one is to create a GDPR repair kit and a one market support center to unlock cross-border data flows. Imagine, for instance, companies being able to go through prior consultation procedures and company-specific codes of conduct, and a central one market support center for data flows to guide companies through compliance and identify where the current framework produces counterproductive outcomes without new legislation. The second recommendation will be public procurement, so make sure that public institutions can be first adopters and also scale public sector AI use cases to drive demand for European solutions. Actually, for this, what is clear is that we need interoperable frameworks, because otherwise we can have fantastic public administrations at the national level dealing public procurement with AI systems, but what we need is an interoperable framework. The third recommendation will be to establish a cross-border Scale-up Europe Fund, and Mrs. Royer before has also mentioned this need for competitiveness and venture capital. But more than that, what we need is a scoreboard for the digital single market to track progress on what has been agreed on in the €1 One Market roadmap late April this year. Finally, use digital qualification recognition to improve cross-border skills mobility. This is for Use Digital. If we go to the policy box on Control Digital, what we highlight is the need to strengthen Europe's position in critical digital value chains. So it's not about substituting technology that we need to assume that we will not be ahead of other countries. What we need is to find our niche markets within the global digital value chains and how we can convert our European companies into indispensable companies within the global value chain. And for this, we have a very clear example, which is ASML. ASML is not the main engine for vehicles, but it's the main element that produces a strategic bottlenecks in global digital value chains. So think about that example. So how can we create other European companies that make that difference and that produce positive dependencies on third companies within the value chain? Then we have other recommendation, which is to coordinate EU funding, and if we go to Control Digital, coordinate EU funding and capital markets to scale European companies, and the real importance of coordinating the 4 funding windows that are being negotiated right now in the European Competitiveness Fund, part of MFF 2028-2034. The third recommendation here in Control Digital is to harmonize public procurement standards for digital services to create demand for European scale. Think about individual member states having divergent criteria and the need to aggregate a demand signal. Otherwise, we will not be able to have European companies that produce and deliver services, both public and private, to countries at the public administration level and also in private ecosystems. And finally, in Control Digital, make EU digital wallets the default infrastructure for cross-border interaction. If we go to the third policy box, which is policy leadership, what we see, and actually this is very much related to what Mrs. Royer said before, enhanced cooperation. We have some examples. For instance, last year, some countries proposed the creation for a European competitiveness laboratory. So all those policy solutions that some member states want to elevate but are very ambitious to be negotiated at the Council of the European Union, let's try to work on pilot projects between national administrations. And once you prove you can have a project, then elevate it to the Council of the European Union and share the main lessons and the results. Once you have this inter-administrative project, you can prove it and say, hey, we can do this at the EU level. We have other recommendations on EPCIs, but also to connect the digital single market to the broader competitiveness agenda so scale-ups can grow. And actually, we will have a speaker working for a Light for Startups on the topic. And also the very importance of integrating EU policy tools and link the digital single market with the Savings and Investments Union, which has also been mentioned by Elisa Royer. So in this case, think about stress test digital single market initiatives against the supply disruption scenarios and coordinate critical technologies that are defined as such based on the economic security strategy from 2023 with the European Competitiveness Fund. And just as the last point, we have the policy box on Simplify Digital in the next slide, where we argue for making compliance easier so regulation supports integration. So what we are saying basically is that digital needs to be the recipient of simplification, but digital technologies can be also used as proactive agents. So think about RegTech, and I know that Sitra, for instance, is developing some tools on RegTech solutions that can be helpful to simplify compliance and strengthen the single market. Also reform the better regulation toolkit before adding new legislation. For instance, here we are talking about covering the most significant delegated and implementing acts and establishing a binding standard for assessing cumulative competitiveness impacts, not just on an individual basis, but their interaction between rules. And finally, we are talking about strengthening enforcement and apply proportionality consistently to cut compliance cost, and also create the new profile of a chief enforcement officer at the executive vice president level. So in the next slide, you will see a mapping that we have created with our colleagues from Sitra, which are real experts into these visualizations. And when you read through the report, you will see how much detailed it is, and it will allow you to go through the different policy recommendations. And now I thank very much Tina. We'll start with panel 1, and I will invite our speakers for panel 1 on the importance of the single market. So Aura Sala, member of the European Parliament, Eric Peters, head of unit for digital decade coordination at DigiConnect, and Eric Philippacht, senior expert on the single market at DigiGrow in the European Commission. Thank you. Okay, so first of all, thank you very much to you all. Actually, I must be sincere. When Sitra and CEPS we were planning how to organize the panel, I only say one panel because actually our idea was to have one panel. The point is that we have 7 speakers, so we decided to divide it into 2 shorter panels to make it more fluid and dynamic. So I am very thankful for all the speakers for having confirmed and also the interest. We got more than 300 registrations, which is a fantastic number. So thanks for that. First of all, I need to inform you that MEP Aura Sala will need to leave at 2, or yeah, it's okay. Otherwise, in case you need it, feel free to leave and we'll excuse you. So in this first panel, we will be talking about the importance of the digital single market. And here we have 2 representatives from the European Commission, both DigiConnect and DigiGrow, who are key players in terms of not only the diagnosis, we already know about the diagnosis, but rather about the implementation and the needs for further execution and coordination with member states. And we have Aura Sala, a member of the European Parliament, who is a very active MEP working on policy initiatives to strengthen European digital competitiveness. So let's start with Aura Sala. I have shared with you some panels I remember in the past, and I would like to know your thoughts about why the digital single market is important. I think that we all think that it's important, but why concretely? So which 3, 4, 5 main policy elements you will highlight, and which are the concrete needs for further action and mostly for further implementation? Because you come from Finland, but you have also worked at the European level through different hats. So I think it's very interesting to know your thoughts about this member state to member state relationship and the link with the EU institutions.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here today. First of all, yes, I'm working as a main rapporteur for the digital omnibus. So we are trying to simplify the GDPR. So I'm a little bit surprised that in this report you are highlighting the GDPR simplification, but the procedure is very far along already because it's in the hands of the lawmakers. The Commission is of course important. They are civil servants who are doing the drafts for these, but to be honest, it's in the hands of the lawmakers, so the European Parliament and member states to decide. Let's not forget that. So Henna Virkkunen is a civil servant, and then you need to turn your heads now to your heads of states, digital ministers, the ministers who are responsible now to GDPR simplification. And it's not so easy. It's so easy to say that let's do and simplify. But the way the EU has been working the last 15 years, it has been building this mayhem of regulation, jungle of digital regulation, which doesn't recognize the need of our European companies at all. If you work at a business, good luck, because you have so many legislations that are over-layered and it's not easy to follow or enforce. But now what we are proposing, it's actually creating even more uncertainty to this market. Because on the GDPR simplification, it touches bases on the Article 4, which is the definition of personal data, right? That's the core of this digital omnibus. And if I have any lawyer in the room who can tell me, is the Commission proposal good? Because I have only heard 100% that the proposal is only creating legal uncertainty. So thanks for that proposal, and good luck for policymakers to try to actually make that happen. What Council is saying will not happen. They are going to go for a full deletion, most likely. So it's up to the Parliament how much we can force that. That's just a concrete example for you, that it's so easy to say in these kind of think tank papers that let's do better regulation, simplify, But when you go to the details, it is terrifying what we can do now, ripping out of this legislation that we built and trying to maintain the actual legal certainty in this market. There are 4 things that we should do. First of all, we need to make sure now that any legislation that I layered, we get rid of, we simplify. That's one thing. Reporting obligations, absolutely, we need to simplify that. And then we need to do proper impact assessment. And this goes to these 2 gentlemen in the room. We need to do proper impact assessment before you propose any new simplification or fitness check on digital. You cannot put this pressure to the Parliament and Member States without a proper impact assessment. And then, of course, we all know that we need to harmonize the market, we need to have the Capital Markets Union, we all know this. But the main thing now with this simplification effort is that it cannot just be that we tick the box and we try to simplify, but we don't actually see through what are the impacts for the market.
Actually, in terms of impact assessments, I think that your point is very interesting because one of the proposals that we have made throughout the report is that impact assessments are important, but it's even more important to make sure that every time you want to create a new digital regulation, make that impact assessment, but also make a multi-regulation impact assessment. So it's not about only the digital fitness check, which is expected to be published by the first quarter of 2027. It's also about if you want to develop a new regulation, bring all the digital-related regulations that can have direct and indirect effects into that. So this is one of the proposals that we are making, so I think it's very interesting what you raised. Now let's move to Eric Pitzers, Head of Unit for Digital Decade or Coordination at DigiConnect. When I was speaking with you the other day by the phone on how to organize the speaking points for today's panel, is something interesting that came to my mind when you were sharing with me some of your ideas, was the link between the digital decade, digital single market, and competitiveness, and the role of member states when executing public policy initiatives.
Yes, indeed. I think a lot of what we are doing at the moment is really shifting from strategy to delivery, and of course, simplification is really at the core of what we are trying to do. But maybe let me start with one, observation. I mean, in your study, you have taken the same definition of digital single market that the one that was coined by President Juncker, a bit more than 10 years ago, the digital single market strategy adopted in May 2015. And if you look at this strategy backwards, you can see that we are still in the same game, which is that if you really want to make growth through in Europe, you need to have a single market. And in single market, if you really want to have the most important benefits, you need to address digital single market. And this was true in the past in 2015 with these 415 billion gains that were estimated by then, to today where next week we are going to issue the Digital Decade, State of the Digital Decade report, in which we are going to quantify quite impressive gains of this digital single market. But there are also many differences. In 2015, the game was about improving consumer surplus. Now it's about scale, it's about sovereignty, it's about also a relationship with the acquis communautaire, which is a bit different. Back in 2015, the acquis was a leverage to use. Today, this is also something that we need to improve through the simplification, for instance. And this focus on delivery is really critical. It is supported by European citizens. If you look at Eurobarometers and when you ask people the question where we should be focusing on, digital policy and having more sovereign digital infrastructure is clearly, something which is very important. And the delivery is exactly what we are trying to do with the Digital Decade, which is to monitor what is happening on the ground, as I just mentioned, and before that, Andrea. So we need to really factor in what is the impact of what we are doing and what are the conditions for SMEs to get digitalized, for cities to train in skills, for infrastructure to be established on chips production. So all these elements, they need to be assessed and analyzed on the ground through concrete targets, concrete objectives, and also established through clear recommendation. And this is where we are, I think, going much bigger as compared with 2015 with the Digital Decade Policy Program. If you look at the report that we issued, the first one in 2023, you already have these 4 elements that are mentioned in the report. Stimulating demand, and here you can look at what we adopted last week with the taxonomy package in terms of public policy demand, public government demand, procurement, but also making sure that digitalization is happening with the demand from SMEs, with the demand from cities. That's very critical. Stimulating the offer and investing in critical infrastructure. Here we are still very far from what we should be in terms of chip production, in terms of quantum marketing these new technologies, in terms of connectivity. I mean, gigabit connectivity is still lagging behind. I mean, of course, we have basic 5G, which is sort of achieving our target, but we need to really do better. And to do better, we need to have actions in 4 or 5 directions. I mean, which are more or less the same that the one that you have mentioned. I mean, we really need to defragment to make sure that fragmentation is being addressed. We need investment, mobilization of public and private investment. We really need to have also cooperation between countries, and we need now also to act and to act on the ground. So that's exactly what we are doing through the recommendation that we are also issuing in our reports.
Fantastic. I will ask you later about the review of the indicators that you are going through right now, because I think this relates very much to some demands by civil society organizations, public administrations, such also the European Commission and the private companies, in terms of having a greater and much more detailed breakdown of how digital technologies are being designed, deployed, commercialized, adopted and used. So I think that your review of indicators is very valuable, but I will be interested in knowing more about the details if possible. Now let's go to Eric Philippart, senior expert on the single market at DigiGrow, because he comes from DigiGrow, which is the hat dealing with single market as the main portfolio. So it will be very interesting to have your thoughts. Also because in DigiGrow you mostly deal with goods, but actually the digital single market is about both goods and services, hardware, software, but also many different fronts in this interplay.
Yes, yes indeed. Yes, very good. Yes, indeed. So my understanding was that you wanted me not to discuss the digital single market. I would not be able to do that, and I'm here to learn and listen and learn, but more how digital tools can help with the completion or simplification of a number of things. So this commission is an agenda-driven commission. Elisa mentioned the compass, then the single market strategy. I was part of the task force, so I still have some recollection of its content. And now we have the roadmap. In the single market strategy of May last year, there are a number of things that refer to horizontal tools, digital tools. The first one is possibly the single digital gateway. The single digital gateway is, remember, at the time of COVID, I was responsible for the tourism ecosystem. It was a nightmare, how to reopen, how just basically for you to cross or to go to any place or to cross a border with what kind of certificate. There were a number of things with AI. It was very easy to forge any document. So we had that system that was rather simple, where you had the information coming from the source directly to the verifying information. So the single digital gateway is there to provide businesses a number of information, but it's mainly for procedures, for digital procedure. You want to open a shop somewhere, you need to prove that you know where you were born, if you have a criminal record, etc. All that is taking a lot of time, can be forged easily. So the single digital gateway is there for a number of critical online procedure for citizens, but mainly for companies. And the problem there is a recurrent problem for the political level. Where do you put the little money you have left? Yesterday there was an event by Friends of Europe and the Jacques Delors Institute, and the Belgian Prime Minister was saying, yes, I'm under pressure to help with energy, energy prices now, but we don't have the money, and I prefer to put the money into something that is an investment into infrastructure that will make us more resilient in the future. Or instead of easing short-term pain, I prefer to invest into resilience in the future. It is a bit what should be done with a single digital gateway. The regulation provides that the member states should be on board as of, the deadline was December 2023. And in December 2023, they were not a single member states who had uploaded was on board with any procedure. So now it had advanced, but advanced too slowly. And of course it's complex, it requires investment, but for a big return. So we have developed a tool on that OOTS once only technical system. It is something that will solve a number of problems, but now it's a question of uploading. So there are other horizontal tools besides that, just for the administration to cooperate more swiftly. But you ask about goods and services. For the goods, we have the digital product passport. So the idea is to move from document to data, and for digital by default. So when you buy a TV screen, the first thing you do, you discard the certificate of conformity, the paper one, all those documents go to the dustbin immediately. So the idea now, we have a digital product passport. It has been introduced for some product, and it will be introduced for more and more product, where basically all the information will be online. And it's also important for the circular economy. Because you have a problem. So what are your obligations if you are the one producing, the online retailers, etc. So that's a big thing for the single market. They are also a big irritant. Many SMEs say, I cannot exploit the opportunity of the single market because of territorial supply constraints. Basically, the big sellers are fragmenting the market. They say, we had a case, Mondelez, Oreo. You are in Belgium, you want to buy the Oreo. In Belgium, you realize that the local branch of Mondelez is charging you this, while if you buy in the Netherlands, is this. So I say, well, single market, I'm free to supply wherever I want. And when you go to the Dutch Mondelez Oreo seller, say, no, you go back to Belgium. So we have, this is a clear example, but some member states are also doing that. Where we need to do something, digital tools are developed for that. For services, and I'm closing on that, it's services, but services we have a problem with the mobility of workers. Sometimes we have people who have the qualification not at the right place, so it's a mobility of the workers, and there are two things. Posting of workers, in the single market strategy, you have the electronic document, so the e-declaration for posting of workers. Because just like there was a time where Japanese VCR, nobody knows what a VCR is, but we were putting just a tape there. Well, you had to clear them. The custom was in the middle of the Alps where there was only one custom officer, etc. So paperwork is also a way to protect your market, to prevent people exerting their rights. So the e-declaration is a simplification, digitization, this is a tongue breaker. So using digital means is the way forward. And to finish, there are other examples, but you have the European Social Security passport, because if you don't know what happened with your pension, if you don't know if you will have to sit for another 6 months of probation before getting reimbursed, then you don't move. So this is not about the negative freedom, so nobody can put barriers, about enabling people to exert their rights. So there are many other examples, but digital means is a way to solve a number of key problems for the single market, circulation of workers, goods and services.
Fantastic. I think that your reference to the use of digital tools for single market is very useful. I will also encourage DigiGrow to have a look at the proposal that we have made on the digital single market scoreboard, because it's true that we are a bit ambitious and we say that it should be binding. I personally know that that's difficult, but at least I will give a try.
It is in my directorate.
Fantastic. So I will give a try. So now let's go back to Aura, because Aura, you have been speaking about the digital omnibus, but I would like also you to make to reflect on some of our proposals on control digital. And when we say control digital, we are not linking it to the tax sovereignty package from last week because it's very recent. So we wanted in the report to focus only on the digital single market and the one market Europe. But something that we highlight is the need of to foster European companies within Europe that can create this competitive differentiality within global digital value chains, looking at the clear example of ASML in the semiconductor supply chain, but also across other digital technologies. So which are your thoughts on that?
So I would say that we will never have global leaders on technology in Europe if we don't start focusing on European technological sovereignty, right? And the package that the Commission proposed last week, it was a good tool in many ways. However, it was lacking of finally saying out loud that the big American companies are the biggest problem for this market, right? And I know that they don't want to see it. They don't want to say it. They are waiting the midterm elections and they are trying to still keep up this relationship, transatlantic relationship. But come on, the country is threatening a sovereign country in Europe, and we are still not able to say that their companies are the biggest problem for this market. And the DMA is not a tool because it's a tool for all companies. Booking.com, Zalando, welcome to the Commission if you grow to be too big for this market. So the price to pay when you are becoming a technological leader in this market is that we will then split you, right? So it doesn't make any sense. So we should finally say out loud that some of these legislation should be actually towards big American and Chinese tech, not towards our own companies. That's the first step, that we need to say that out loud and we should act on that. Is it easy? No. But would Pentagon ever use European tech? No, they wouldn't. But our public sector is completely using American companies. And it's a critical infrastructure. I have said it many times, but if Microsoft choose to leave today or use the kill switch again, public sector in many of our countries, including my own, would be down the public sector in 1 hour, less than in 1 hour. So what we need to do right now is that first we need to get the market dominance to our own companies and not to American and US companies. Second thing, we need to start using data, or we should understand that data is the most valid and important raw material that we have right now. And data is an immaterial right, and we cannot let these American and Chinese companies export that out from Europe for free. Data transfers agreement with the US, it's not valid anymore. And we are giving our data for free for TikTok and other Chinese companies, which doesn't make any sense. Let's make sure that our European companies can leverage that data and train their AI models with that European data. That's the second most important thing. And then the third thing is that European public sector, we must start using European technology today. Yes, it's difficult. You need to have an open source model like Linux at the bottom. Then you take Nextcloud from France or Deutsche Telekom from Germany. Then you take WithSecure cybersecurity from Finland. And then you need to make sure that there is interoperability between these services. But it is doable, and France is doing it right now. So the EU institutions needs to do that now. And sorry, but it's not a sovereign tech if Proximus is still using Google's hardware. So the Commission needs to also act on that what it actually means to be sovereign technology and be honest about that. But that's the third step I would do. And then, of course, we need to go deeper in this simplification with a proper impact assessment. And also answering the question, what do we want to do with the definition on personal data, for example? Commission wants to change that. But the problem is that if we enable more data use, personal data use for companies, how it's written right now, it would benefit the most American companies. So yet again, we need to have these building blocks towards American and Chinese companies before we ease up regulation on personal data, for example, to our European companies, because otherwise we just serve them and we don't enable our own companies.
Thank you, Aura. I know that it's 2 p.m., so in case you need to leave, please feel free to do so. We'll excuse you because we now have 10 minutes left. So let's move to Eric. I think that Eric Peters, I think that the point about, because we have two Erics. So Eric Peters, the point about control digital relates very much with the role of member states and making sure that we can have cross-border projects. Actually, this was one of the elements from the Digital Compass 2030. So I'm very curious about, first of all, this current process on the review of indicators as such. I always think about the indicator on basic digital intensity and how much needed it's a new indicator for mature digital intensity. Second, a further breakdown on the real usage and adoption of digital technologies, including those which are already existing in the indicators, but also more technologies and also the different layers, as Aura mentioned, right, on the different layers, and if we go deep into the details of the technological stack. And third, the current state of cross-border projects among countries.
I will respond to your question, but first I would like to echo what I just said in terms of we can act now. And this is very important because in a sense, member states, companies, cities, regions can already, they already have the freedom to act, to cooperate, to invest in a context where private and public investment needs really to catalyze this scale. If there is no way that we can scale our digital ecosystem unless we really make accessible in much bigger formats public and private investment in a context where, because of the end of the RRF, we are going to see quite an important gap in terms of public funding flows. So the bulk of the finance should come from the private sector, but public flows is very important to build private-public partnerships. Look at what we have done on HPC, what we are trying to do on quantum, what we are trying to do with AI gigafactories. So the seed is very important. And by the way, next week we are going to publish a very interesting study that we conducted with ECFIN, which shows that for each euro that was spent on digital in the RRF, the gains was 1.5 euros. So there is a spillover effect of 50%, which, by the way, was also spread across countries. So €1 given in Italy was also having benefit effect in Netherlands or in Germany. So just to say that we can act now, and member states can already, in their national roadmap, the Digital Decade national roadmap that they need to revise, already prepare the measures that they want to take to make choices when they are procuring products and services, to make choices to invest in AI gigafactories, to create this new European Digital Infrastructure Consortium, the EDICS, where they can cooperate concretely on building data space for health, when they can have skills, cybersecurity skills academy, when they can also build digitalization in the agricultural sector. So I think we should be in a delivery mode in a way that we can really act already now and not waiting for the endorsement and the finalization of regulatory process, which are critical and very important for the future. But we can already make a strong difference now. The second element I wanted to say that, of course, the Digital Decade, which is going to provide for a lot of recommendations that will respond to what you said, because we are going to really make a bit like the semester. We have a small semester, which is a Digital Decade, which is really articulated with it. By the way, if you read the chapeau communication of the spring semester issued last week, you will see that the Digital Decade is a reference for digital, for assessing the gaps, for assessing where we are vis-à-vis our targets. And by the way, Raquel, you have a DSM scoreboard, and it's called the Digital Decade. I mean, we already have that, plus the governance that we have with the member states, which are through the Digital Decade board. So in a sense, this framework can also evolve. And you mentioned the fact that we are reflecting indeed on making adjustments so that the Digital Decade can better grasp on sovereignty issues, make sure that also, the skills element, which is critical. I mean, it's one of the key challenges that we are facing at the moment. I mean, our objective of 20 million of ICT specialists, we are just half of that, and this is not progressing with the speed we should have. On basic skills now, it's clear that we need to adjust and we need to adapt to the AI world and AI context, where the skills that were required 20 years ago are not the same that the one that we expect people to have in order to live in an AI world. So we are going to make those adjustments. The process is already starting. We have had a discussion in the Council last year in December with the member states. We are also in touch with the Parliament. We are going to issue a report where we are going to set out a series of directions, of course, about cybersecurity, about sovereignty, sustainability, skills. We are going to put forward a few elements linked both to the change in terms of technology, but also change in terms of policy priorities, which are not the same as backwards 5 years ago. So that's something that will be proposed in the next months. But then, of course, we are going to go through the co-legislative process. It will take a bit of time for making sure that co-legislators, decide on our proposal. And of course, it will be endorsed only and entry into force, by 2028 or 29. So in a sense, I don't want to give the impression that we need to wait for that to act. We can act already on sovereignty, on resilience, on competitiveness for digital within the current digital decade policy program. We have general objectives which are setting clearly these elements in. And now I think the priority is with member states, and we are going to discuss that next week in Nicosia, in a meeting organized by the presidency, how we can concretely make sure that member states are putting forward the measures that they will implement to precisely do all the things that we are discussing today. I mean, simplification in terms of involving cities, in terms of harnessing skills, digitalization of SMEs, all these things that they can put that in their national roadmap, so that later, once the MFF will be in force, they are going also to be able to take those measures and to bring them for their NRPPs to make sure that digital is going to be a part that will be supported by Europe collectively when they are doing these measures.
Fantastic. Eric Philippart, as we have 3 minutes left, maybe it will be interesting if you can focus a bit more on digital services, even if I know that it's not part of DigiGrow, but maybe you can make some reflections on that as senior expert, and also if you want to reply to one of them or to both.
Yeah. Coming from a long time ago from academia, etc., I know that honesty about the limitation of your knowledge is a first thing you should respect. And so I have very limited knowledge about the digital service market. If you have questions about impact assessment, better regulation, enhanced cooperation, or other things that have to do with single market, I would be ready to answer. And otherwise, I'm giving the whatever time is left to the two others, or if Eric Peters want to discuss that.
Fantastic. So I think that in any case, it will be very interesting to reflect. So you have mentioned this social security passport. That relates very much with our next panel and our colleague from Allied for Startups, so the need for a much more integrated single market in terms of different laws, such as insolvency law, but also labor law. So which are the current developments in terms of this social security passport and the positive impact that it may have on some sectors that are using digital technologies? I think about the startups, scale-ups.
In terms of sectors, so it was critical for the tourism ecosystem at the time because of the seasonality, and because seasonality means that you have a peak in terms of workers' demand, and then it goes down, etc. So, but if we think, because this is not the only type of digitization that can help, one of the elements I did not mention is professional qualification and automatic recognition of that. So they are, during the Letta report, so I was the Sherpa of Enrico Letta, so 300 meetings, and number of people, it was Chatham House rules. These are Chatham House rules as well, I suppose.
It's a public event.
Yep, well, okay, so, but in any case, I'm not going to point at any national administration, but in some member member states say we do that on paper. And the expert group, granting recognition or not, is meeting every 3 months. And it's physical presence on paper, so we can deal with only so much things. And there, this is not an ends cooperation. This is something that is in the treaty from the start. The Benelux, there's a protocol Benelux in 58 saying they can go ahead with the single market, etc. And they have done so in that area. So they are automatic recognition in a number of higher education degree and also professional qualification among Benelux. And I was recently at their inter-parliamentary session to discuss the single market, and they were representative from the Nordic and the Baltic regional groupings. And in fact, they are developing that. So basically, when you think of it, there was a long time ago something called the Hanseatic League, where people were moving. Of course, Germany was part of that, but when we think of that, we have the 3 Benelux countries, we have the 3 Baltic countries, and among the Nordic countries, there are 3 member states. So we have already, because you mentioned the E6 are the biggest one, but I wanted to take an example where among the smallest one, 9 of them are de facto having an enhanced cooperation for something that is critical. They have digitized a number of processes for recognition of higher education and also for automatic recognition of professional qualification. They are showing the way, and this is one of the things that could inspire. And this is something that the single market strategy want to work on, just to emulate that and to go much faster. And that will help many ecosystems, not only the tourist one. The IT one would benefit from that. So in the EU Inc., you have also something that has to do with the talents are not in your country. EU Inc. would allow you not to have to close one company you create. We had an example that was documented also, Benelux, a Belgian entrepreneur, the talents are in the Netherlands. Then when he's close to the first patent, he put into competition the administration of the 3 countries. Luxembourg is making the most generous offer, but you have to close your company in the Netherlands and to have to recreate, establish your company and all the patents, okay, public support, you understand. It took that entrepreneur, his name, he accepted his name, Martin Skonbrood. It took him 3 months to close the company in the Netherlands, to create the one in Luxembourg. And when he was close to the production level in probiotic, in biotech, then there was no space in Luxembourg. He wanted to do that in Wallonia, but then he had the same story just to start a production line. So we have a number of things that have to do with a number of, and in IT sector, we had terrible story like that too. The talents are all over Europe and beyond. We need to help and digitize it, and a number of things like EU Inc. might help in that respect.
Yes, fantastic. So we'll conclude with this. Thank you very much to three all. And now I think that you referred to a concrete example on these groups of 3 countries in terms of recognition of qualifications. And I think that that's very relevant in terms of the European Competitiveness Lab that was proposed last year by Spain jointly with other European countries on how national public administrations can work together to develop pilot projects in this inter-administrative manner. I think that the example that you gave is highly interesting. And I think that what we need now is to put examples into motion and think about how we can create these pilot projects to make sure that we can elevate these at the EU level. So thank you very much to you all. Our Sala needed to leave already, but now I will invite our colleagues who come from different stakeholders' perspectives. So I invite Vasco Pereira da Silva from Allied for Startups to come, Claudio Teixeira from BEUC, and Antonio Grasso from the European Digital SMEs Alliance. Thank you. Okay, so thank you very much for your information. You will have seen on the agenda from a few days ago that we had Dimitri Lorenzani, acting head of unit at DigiConnect. Unfortunately, he needed to decline yesterday evening due to some points with his agenda. And as for Allied for Startups, we had Serena Bourbotti-Frisson, the Director General, and due to external issues, she's not available to come. So here we have Vasco Pereira da Silva, Head of Policy at Allied for Startups. So we are very grateful for your participation, and I think that now that we have discussed with representatives from DigiGrow, DigiConnect, and the European Parliament what is needed, I think that now it's up to you, because you come from two associations and one consumers organization to reflect on which are the needed next steps. For instance, let's try to come up with concrete projects, concrete ideas on the digital single market based on either the 4 policy boxes that we have shared, so use digital, control digital, policy leadership and governance, plus simplify digital. Or you can also, we can have a dynamic discussion among us, trying to find areas of alignment and also trying to get some consensus, because I think that that's important in terms of associations which represent a large number of members. So let's start with Antonio Grasso, because you are here next to me, Policy Director at the European Digital SMEs Alliance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raquel, and thank you for the invite to this very much needed debate. Also happy to have seen the outcome of your paper and the recommendations that align very well with what we need in order to really complete the digital single market. But if I may start, maybe I would indeed take a look at how the One Market, One Europe roadmap is shaped. And we find it very positive from the perspective of tech SMEs that the roadmap acknowledges that the single market overall is not only a nice to have for European society and industry, but it has become, in the current geopolitical environment, a strategic tool to foster European competitiveness. And as such, an important dimension that is recognized in the roadmap is the capacity of Europe to indeed create leadership, industrial leadership and capacity, and lead on digital and AI. So, of course, we welcome this step made in the roadmap, and now we hope that this kind of acknowledgement translate into practice. Now, you ask us how this can become reality and what are the concrete recommendations we want to see. Well, if we agree here that creating European capacity becomes fundamental in order to complete the digital single market, then we believe that there is a strong link between the single market and the issue of technological sovereignty. And we have seen this by the publication of the package by the Commission last week. We think this is a first and welcome step, because it established for the first time a kind of more strategic approach to digital and industrial policy, which is something we've been advocating for long by now. And basically, it introduced some of the key elements that are needed in order not only to create capacity, so from the supply side, encourage investment in homegrown and sovereign technology, but also from the demand side, maybe for the first time, including recommendations towards member states and actually obligations towards member states to consider some kind of basic sovereign criteria to award tenders when it comes to usage of cloud and AI technology. So we believe this is a very welcome step, and it's a first one to also leverage on a tool like public procurement to create public demand for European technologies. As our Sala was saying, we can harmonize the single market, we can simplify rules, and these are all welcome steps. But if we don't create the demand also via public authorities, via the public sector for European technologies, we do not we miss a key component for European companies to scale across borders and compete with the hyperscalers also from the US. So creating demand for us is fundamental. public procurement helps with the public demand, but there is also the component of the private demand that we need to leverage. And for this, we are recommending and we are working also with our members to propose a scheme that could be a kind of digitalization voucher scheme, similar to what we recommend for the usage of digital, in order to boost private demand. And we have seen in some member states, including Spain, that this type of incentives to private actors, including SMEs, to adopt digital technologies work. They work in increasing the productivity of companies. They work in increasing the adoption of these digital technologies. What we need is that these schemes are coherent with a technological sovereign approach by including sovereign consideration and making sure that the adoption does not end up fostering the dominance of a few US and Chinese players, but actually goes to the advantage of the European ecosystem, the European sovereignty and the European competitiveness, by making sure that even the private sector starts using more and more European companies and does not end up to be stuck into dependency to non-European providers. So perhaps for now I stop here, and maybe there will be a chance to discuss even more ideas.
Yes, thank you, Antonio. You have referred to SMEs. Another key player is the group of startups and scale-ups. And I think that Alive for a Startup is also playing a very interesting role in pushing them forward, in integrating them much more into the public policy discussions, but also through AFS making sure that the reality of startups and scale-ups is visible in the decision-making process here in Brussels and across member states. So which will be your next steps to further consolidate the digital single market?
Well, first of all, thanks for the invitation and also for having me replacing last minute Serena. As you know, a lot of our work recently has been very much focused on more traditional questions on the single market itself. I think that in the previous panel, I managed to hear this example of this founder on a biotech company that had to close the company to reopen elsewhere. Yesterday, I was in Luxembourg talking with a scale-up founder from Luxembourg, and it was really striking to me when at a certain point he was not talking about his company, but he was saying my 7 companies, because he has the same company 7 times in 7 member states. So a lot of our work recently has been really focused on this initiative that was mentioned already today here, of the U-Inc. and also called the 28th regime, indeed to address a more profound question on the single market for companies. That is the reality that when a company cross border, for several reasons, it has to incorporate again. And this, especially for startups, as you know, very fast growth companies, slows them down in comparison with competitors from other regions. So I agree with what just Antonio said, but there's this dimension, at least that we see from the companies you represent, that on a daily basis, they are not thinking about what we discuss here in Brussels, right? The digital single market and all these components and regulations. They are concerned with really practical business questions most of the times. That is like, how can I hire the best talent from European universities? How can I reach to new markets within the EU, gain trusted consumers? How can I scale fast, indeed, to compete with companies from other regions that reach the European market without having this trouble, because when they arrive here, they're already so big that they don't have to face this reality. So the focus right now for us is very much to have this fight to cross the line. And the next step, I think, for us, which is an even more complex discussion, is everything revolving around Savings and Investment Union, so the capital markets. Because indeed here we also have staggering numbers of very low cross-border financing, private finance to our companies. Most of our startups and scale-ups are dependent on funding coming from other regions, well, at least on the private side. And indeed, it's not because we lack money in Europe, it's just it's not being mobilized. So I think these are like the 2 big questions for us. And of course, this then is coupled with everything that is more specifically happening within the digital single market with the simplification packages here at a moment where actually we have a bit more of a cautious perspective. We are happy with some of these proposals, but what we would really like to see is a logic of, well, simplification, or at least of good or better regulation in long term, because that's not what we have seen. There is this sometimes idea that startups don't like regulation, which is not true. They like legal certainty, is very important for the businesses, but it's a legal maze that is too hard for them to navigate compared to bigger companies. And so this is also a point that is quite important for us in the upcoming months.
Thank you for that. Now let's go to the perspective from consumers with Claudio Teixeira, because I think that your voice is also very relevant, because we need to circle the full ecosystem revolving around digital single market. And I think that in terms of the consumer's perspective, it's highly important what, for instance, Eric Philippart mentioned before in terms of social security, passports, but also the fact that some consumers are also developers of technologies as such. So we have like many fronts at the same time. So which are your thoughts from Beuk?
First of all, thank you so much for the invitation. Good afternoon, everyone. So on behalf of BEUC, the European Consumer Organization, it's a pleasure to be here. Just a quick note for those who don't know us. So we represent 42 consumer organizations in, we're 42 now, in 31 countries. And basically, well, the clue's in the name, or the consumer voice in Europe, in Brussels, advocating for the consumer interest. That gives us a very good, interesting perspective and a unique position here, if you don't mind me saying so, because it does give us this unique perspective of public interest of what do citizens want, what do consumers want, but most importantly, what do they need, and what do they require at a given time. And it's that perspective that we keep finding to be missing from this debate. We hear a lot, I think that the closest we get is what we just heard right now, is the issue that we at least should prioritize demand. That's pretty much it. And I'm afraid that's not enough. But even if we start at that base level, we could very much say that it is indeed an issue of demand. In any market functions because there are essential basic services that need to be provided, and the operators that do provide them reply essentially to the demands of the market. That means demands of consumers. The idea that somehow we should engineer products that people have not expressed any wish whatsoever to acquire, use, or develop. The idea that somehow we should prioritize policies that until now have not been really put on the table by anyone except a very small, reduced number of stakeholders is indeed a contradiction of that. And when we look at whole debate on simplification, this is indeed what we see across the scale. It does not address a reality that has been observed, assessed, and certified by most stakeholders. It does not address real demands by consumers, end users, whatever you want to call it, depending on the industry. And it does not really address the real market dynamics at play. So it makes you wonder, so who is this for? We're talking about simplification, but we need to ask the question, simplification for whom? Who is this benefiting? And here is where we see throughout this debate, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to bring a bit the panel from before, we see a lot of mismatch in the narratives of what we are trying to achieve here and what the regulations are actually doing. So we just heard, and I think I completely agree with Vasco here when he says that exactly, companies do not fear regulation. They welcome it. They do not fear legal certainty. They welcome it. So why have we actively sought to destroy the very basis that is the most essential part of the market? Stability, legal certainty, predictability, clear rules that apply for everyone, and, which I may remind, were introduced over the past decade precisely to give European companies an advantage by securing our market against foreign companies who have only scaled up, consolidated, and developed products we are now all dependent on because their markets themselves had no rules when it comes to ensuring fair competition, had no rules preventing them from acquiring the very asset that now makes them so so dominant, which is data, in an unlawful manner, no rules that actually allow them to get where they are now. These rules are introduced at the European market to make sure that the same would not happen here. Not to limit European companies' ability to do business, but to ensure that if any company, foreign or domestic, that wants to do business here, you need to respect our fundamental rights, you need to respect fundamental European principles and values. And that was supposed to be our competitive edge. That was supposed to be what's going to put us on the map. And I have to say, you look at the legislation like DMA, for instance, you see how that is being extremely successful. So why all of a sudden are we turning back on this and somehow introducing, I can't believe I'm agreeing with Aura today, introducing real changes that are actually benefiting not European companies, as the narrative keeps telling us, but disproportionately empowering the companies that already have a stranglehold on the digital ecosystem in several markets, which are precisely non-European companies. This is the problem we have at hand. It is not the rules that are somehow stifling the rules that are stifling innovation, not the rules apparently on the burdens on compliance. This is not an AI registration requirement that costs you 100 euros a year that is stifling European innovation and dominance and our inability to challenge Chinese and the US giants. What is doing that is precisely telling companies who had already invested millions onto compliance, all of the rules like the AI Act, GDPR, telling them, forget all of that, put it in the dustbin, because we're changing everything all over again. And in the meantime, we're going to give you a year or something to figure it out, because even we don't know what we want to do with this. That is what creates us an inability to make sure that European companies can indeed have a solid basis and build business. And when we're talking about the single market here, this is essentially the part that is missing, because that's what consumers keep asking. We want one single market with single rules so that borders can indeed be a thing of the past. We've done this very successfully with roaming. Consumers were at the forefront of this when it comes to ensuring that consumers need a single market that works for them. And what is more easy than just you cross the border and you still can use the service you had at home? This was an incredible success story. This is what consumers really want. Instead of rules to end burden on compliance, we should have rules that remove barriers to do business cross borders, to actually offer solutions, services that people can use regardless of where they are in the union. Because if we are a single market, there's no fundamental reason why. If you want to access the content that you have subscribed at home, you come to Brussels and, sorry, geo-blocked. There is absolutely no reason why you have your own operator at home, you're using your telephone, your mobile phone, you go to Greece on vacation, roaming, everything works fine. But if you are sitting in the comfort of your home or in your office in Belgium and you want to cross your supplier, probably down the road a couple of meters, but that crosses an international border and that's a different number from another country, sorry, international call, you're going to pay a huge bill, so bill shock, sorry, no international calls for you. What sense does this make? You're on vacation, it's fine. You're at home, but you want to call cross-border, probably just 200 meters down the road, you have to pay. That is the real barriers in the single market that we need to get rid of. These are the rules we need to simplify, streamline, to ensure that we can create this competition at a European level. And until we actually focus on addressing these issues that prevent companies from becoming European in dimension and providing European services to enable European consumers and European enjoyment of services, we are not going to get there. No matter how much obligations that save you 100 euros a year, you get rid of.
Very interesting. I will ask you later, Claudia, about cross-border skills mobility, but also I will be also very interested in knowing more about concrete examples on services that you don't have when you cross your own border. I'm thinking, for instance, about automated payment systems online, but now it's true that stakeholders in that sector, in the financial sector, they are trying to work much more on an interoperable platform. It's not a single mechanism, it's a combination of 27 automated payment systems, but at least it's something that has been advanced, so I think that's an interesting step. Now let's go back to Antonio from the European Digital SMEs Alliance, because You were talking before about the creation of some platforms for SMEs. You highlighted the example of Spain, but I would like also you to highlight how you are working in the association with national members that really want to push forward a digital single market which is much more integrated, but in practice, how you are doing it, with some examples that you can share.
Well, for instance, also meeting a bit the needs of the consumer, because what our companies tell us is that consumers wanna more and more know and be aware about the control that they have over the digital services and tools they use. They wanna make sure that there is continuity in the services they use. And so our companies witness a kind of also shift in the approach to these services and an increasing awareness to sovereignty as a crucial element of the choices that consumers make when it comes to looking at what type of tools they use when they are online or when they want to store their data, for instance. So also taking in consideration that, but also taking in consideration the needs of the market, because many of our members offer services that are mostly as well business to business. We have put in place an initiative also with several supportive partners, including CEPS, by the way, that is the Tech Sovereignty Catalog. Because until basically last week, when for the first time we reckoned that the Commission was a bit more proactive in shaping an industrial policy that looks at the sovereignty as an essential dimension that can also drive competitiveness, we felt like there was a lack of awareness and mapping of the capacities that are crucial in order to deliver on a complete digital single market. And that's why we put forward, together with our members, a tech sovereignty catalog, which is mapping out the current possibilities across technological layers for Europe to use homegrown solutions in order to indeed leverage their technological leadership worldwide on the basis of strong sovereignty criteria that pertain with operational control and also legal and jurisdictional immunity from extraterritorial laws. And we consider that this is an important issue to consider for sovereignty, for competitiveness, but also indeed looking at the wider benefit of society, because when talking about services that consumers use, I still remember very well the date of the 19th of July 2024. It was the day where I was traveling to go on holiday, and there was a Microsoft outage that affected many airports across Europe. So, and I couldn't get my flight to go on holiday. So that was a concrete example of how consumers across the Union are even paying the consequences of structural dependencies that we have in Europe, that even the private sector, such as the airlines and the airports, have in terms of structural dependencies on non-European providers, on a few. Entire supply chain depend on a few non-European providers. And even if, of course, that outage was simply caused by a technical error, then millions of consumers across the Union paid the consequences of a dependency that critical infrastructure, such as the transport sector, have on only one provider of operations in that sector. So that is why also through initiatives like the catalog and by putting forward proposals such as those voucher schemes that I mentioned above concerning the really incentivizing the private sector in adopting sovereign solutions, we believe that the needle can be moved in order to prompt even private sector across Europe to adopt sovereign solutions. And this is key to deliver on the digital single market, but also benefit the whole European society. And let me tell you that we need to really be bold on it, because there is a lot of sovereignty washing ongoing. I really appreciated the strong words that Aura Sala used before to say that to some extent, the US dominance and also the Chinese dominance is one of the key problems to the digital single market, because they are simply not creating an ecosystem that is based on fair competition and free market principles. So we need to put forward into European policy, as it has been initiated via the Cloud and AI Development Act, particularly strong sovereignty criteria that enable to start with the public authorities to choose the providers that give them access to critical services that make them more resilient. And then we need to consider how to prompt also the private sector and consumer to adopt solutions that benefit their position in the market and their overall welfare. And of course, we also need to consider this dimension of sovereignty when it comes to broader aspects that pertain to the digital single market, including skills that were mentioned, because when we talk about upskilling to take stock of the progress of digital and technological advancement, we talk about it in terms of training, access to training, and so on, but we don't talk about what type of skills we are training. Because if we, in order to assess these skills, we rely on certifications that come from private vendors and always the few non-European vendors, it means we are training people to use a few tools, and we make those skills dependent on those tools, while we need more transversal skills that enable people to understand how digital technologies are developed and can be used by the European market to develop these technologies ourselves. And so we find, and we are also working with universities, when you ask me, also in terms of additional initiatives we are undertaking, in order to even put in university curricula that recognize the strong linkage between skills development and sovereignty, in order to avoid a vendor lock-in effect, even in the way we develop skills in Europe. And I believe this is critical also to make sure we are in control of the digital single market.
And Antonio, just a short question going back to the digital single market point. Which proposals will you have, apart from the digital sovereignty issue, which is now very on the top of the discussions, but going back to the digital single market point, which are your proposals on creating strategic projects among different EU member states so that SMEs can be included in those strategic projects? I'm thinking, for instance, about the AI gigafactories that have been proposed by the Executive Vice President Henna Virkkunen. So now DigiConnect is reviewing the proposals from member states. Each member state has proposed 1 to 2 projects with different stakeholders, including startups, scale-ups, large companies, but also SMEs. So for you, which will be the main next steps to make sure SMEs are included in big projects across member states?
Well, if you ask me honestly, when I talk to my members, they are not so much aware yet about the potential that they could have in terms, for instance, of access to computing capacity via the AI factories and gigafactories projects. That means that Europe is not yet delivering when it comes to involving SMEs in those type of projects. So certainly there is a lot of potential in indeed creating public-private partnerships at European level on delivering critical digital infrastructure. Certainly our members also believe that this is the way to go. There are good examples at member state level. There are also, when it comes to skills development, for instance, and this is also in the context of European initiatives such as the Union for Skills. We have experimented that the Pact for Skills has been successful when it comes to bringing together public and private stakeholders in developing ecosystem that can train the European workforce for the skills that are needed to be competitive and resilient in the next decades. So definitely these projects that have been put forward, including the AI factories, have a lot of potential, but so far they have not been successful in including at the early stage of development. From what really we can directly hear from our members, they have not been successful in involving SMEs, and this is clearly a critical concern for us. That said, when it comes to, if you ask me what is the most important project or leverage that the single market can have to deliver concrete even technological developments that serve the industry and the wider society, we have been advocating for the creation of a European technological stack. Of course, it's something that needs to be delivered through a kind of holistic approach to policies, including, for instance, via public procurement. So creating a kind of mission-oriented industrial policy, and the CADA could be the first step of this ecosystem that leverage also on public procurement, so in different member states, to bring together private and public actors to deliver technology and to incentivize European actors to deliver technology. I think it's the right direction to go.
Very interesting. Now let's go to Vasco. So for instance, we have included some proposals, Vasco, in our study on connecting the Savings and Investments Union explicitly to digital scale-up financing through a published Digital Single Market Scale-Up Financing Pact, setting capital mobilization targets, and also activate the unified IPO gateway proposed in the letter report, and position ESMA as single supervisor for cross-border digital issuance. So which are your thoughts on, so also based on what Claudia and Antonio have shared, but also these points and other points that you would like to...
I mean, I think these initiatives are positive. I think I want to, going back to things I said and also fellow panelists, looking specifically on the funding part, as we all know here in Brussels, the reality is very complex, and discussions around Savings Investment Union and specific files within have been long on the table and with liberal evolution. And we also aware that anything that might change on this field is going to take a long time. So we don't see profound structural changes in these elements, but specific measures. On the funding specifically, we don't have perhaps there are of course problems, but we don't have, and sometimes we're not aware of that, we don't have really like a startup problem in Europe. We really have a scale problem. So there's still a lot of mechanisms available to support startups when they start. And of course here you have European funding, but a lot of them also at a national level, different type of initiatives. For example, when it comes to the transition from the universities to the companies, just for new founders, or when they're like giving the first steps after creating the company. But then you see a massive gap when it comes to funding when these companies start to scale. This is one of the reasons so many of our unicorns and some scale-ups leave to US, right? Because they don't manage to get the same level of tickets and investment in Europe that they could get in other regions. And some other markets have been more successful in this mobilization. Very recently, there was last week officially launched a very interesting initiative. There is the Scale Europe Fund at the IEC Summit. And indeed, this is the direction we're trying to see some of these initiatives to go. You know that, of course, if we're looking at public funding for companies, especially when they reach a certain level, there's all the obvious implications and difficulties of using taxpayer money for companies. And so there's a lot of requirements for having access to this money. The processes for public funding are very long. I mean, this comes with the responsibility of using that money, but it's inefficient for companies that grow really fast. And in the case of the Scale Euro Fund, we'll see now how it's going to be implemented. But a really interesting aspect is that out of these first 5 billion euros that are put in this fund, just 1/5 is coming from the Commission, from public funding, and all the other money is coming from private entities in Europe, and they have this goal to reach at least 20 billion euros to particularly fund startups and scale-ups on the deep tech sectors and areas of great potential in Europe at this stage, like AI, med tech, clean tech, quantum, which is an area where, fortunately, we're still winning, and hopefully we will in the future. So it's very positive to have further work like the proposals you mentioned, but we sometimes feel like, you know, I think startups are not just waiting for new specific programs or initiatives. I think there's more like a profound layer. I think the Commission struggles to change things when it comes to funding in Europe. I think also to add to, Antonio mentioned this, and I think it's a really relevant point. There's the question on demand, which is fundamental for these companies. Very soon we'll see what we're going to find in the Public Procurement Act in July. And this is also something that our members have been pushing for, that we need more money from public funding allocated to startups. The reality on the ground is very complicated, right? Because indeed, we've seen some positive experiences with pilots, especially at municipalities level in certain sectors. For example, mobility is a really good case, where certain companies, startups can provide some innovative services in that sector. But then the point is that when you have really the tender, you know, like it's normal that they will move under certain criteria to bigger established companies and forget about these new solutions. So let's see what's happening. To be really honest, on Savings Investment Union, I think it's like the really next big battle, at least for the industry I represent. But I think it's going to take many years to go in that direction. We see already some member states trying to work on this, but it's a very, very complex reality. And even the world of public funding for startups is amazing in itself. With all the programs, there's not much knowledge about them. There's like not so much support in the process. I mean, I give you this as an anecdote. Last year I was in a Web Summit, and they have like a pitch session, and the winners is a Portuguese startup that specializes in as a company to help other companies to apply for EU funding and to have access to grants. It became and it's not only one in Europe, there are others. So it became a business model. It's so complicated to navigate public funding in Europe. So we need companies to create AI platforms for this. So I think there's a deeper reflection, but again, it also depends on the willingness to go all in the same direction. I think this is something that's very much lacking in the past few years in Europe overall. Now we all talk about competitiveness very strongly and about our companies, but then the reality is, if everyone around the table really wants real change, again, going back, and I know this is also about access to finance. This proposal on EU Inc., because the point is that these companies can grow fast and then they can have access to money. But you see already the discussions and where member states position themselves and certain political families in the European Parliament. There's this constant disalignment so we can have on paper a lot of ambition, but then things don't really move. So again, we are happy to work with any initiatives that will bring more money to the companies we represent. But I think there's a more in-depth layer of reflection that has to exist in Europe to especially unlock all this money that is sitting, you know, in bank accounts, and that should be invested in our economy and our companies. But it's not going anywhere.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up with you, Vasco, and then we move to Claudio. We can open the discussion with the audience. So Vasco, 2 points. I remember that before the EU Inc. proposal was launched, Allied for Startup was working on a common definition on what startup and scale up mean in Europe, because we had 27 member states. Some of them had a national definition on what a startup or scale up is, or even an innovative company. Others didn't even have it. So, which are your thoughts about the approach that has been proposed now in terms of what a startup and a scale up are? That's the first point. The second point is in terms of public funding. You were speaking about startups and scale-ups benefiting from public funding, and I think that the second element is relevant in terms of how member states also think about the digital single market as an integrated market, a single market, and not 27 markets where they only give public funding to their own companies at the national level. So, for example, now with the proposal for the European Competitiveness Fund as part of the MFF, one of the articles talks about IPCIs, not only benefiting from voluntary contributions from member states, as it has been shaped until now. What they are proposing now is that the very European Commission could contribute with public money into those projects. This means that if there is there is a presence of the European Commission into investing in cross-border countries, that may help also member states think about the added value of a truly integrated digital single market. So which are your thoughts regarding the role of startups and scale-ups?
Well, I can already start with this point. I mean, here, how much the member states follow the lead in the Commission when they're involved in this type of initiatives, you know, I mean, we're a bit agnostic on this, right? I think companies will always be looking at the result, how we get there. I'm not the best place to address that issue. I think it could be a good, in theory, it could look like a good incentive for member states. And indeed, the Commission, at least when it comes to startups and scale-ups, has been active in trying to give more elements to member states to take good public policy decisions towards startups and scale-ups. Also, like now, last week or 2 weeks ago, they launched a new scoreboard that compares public policies in the member states for these companies. So here, I mean, if this would, you know, create this positive effect, I mean, I think we would, in any case, be happy with it. On your question on definitions, and you know, this is a very complex issue. Indeed, a certain number of member states, or actually the majority of member states, don't have current definition for startups or scale-ups, and the ones that have, they have it done differently. Some of them have it in national laws. That's the case of Spain, Portugal, and others. And these definitions are obviously not the same, and they looked at different criteria for defining these companies. The Commission put forward when they presented the EU Inc. Proposal a recommendation for definitions of innovative companies, innovative startups, and innovative scale-ups. To be honest, we have not been very reactive on the definition, because our concern was not just what the definition could be. In our case, when you represent startup communities across Europe, it's very hard to find, you know, what's the ideal way of defining startups. Also because the ecosystems at the local, national level are very, very different. So they have different realities. For us, what we've always said was what mattered was how the definition was going to be used. You know, at a certain point, we were a bit scared that the definition would come for the first time in the European Innovation Act, because it was also supposed to have been presented in March. And we said, well, if you're going to write it in a regulation, the temptation to I mean, we don't know what the definition is going to be, but if this starts being used in all other pieces of EU legislation, that might be problematic. Also because here it's important to mention, us as representing startups, we represent startups in very different industries with very different realities. And of course, the rules that you can apply by using a definition for a startup in AI, it's definitely not the same use for a more, you know, like a deep tech, certain types of deep tech type of startups that sometimes take very long time to evolve and reach a certain dimension. So what we want to see now is how actually these definition or adapted versions of this definition is going to be used. So we got mixed reactions also from our members. Some of them were like, okay, this is positive, but there's no real use of it yet. I mean, there's a possible use for now for e-ink because there's a section for insolvency where they use say, okay, this fast track procedure for insolvency and fully online is going to be for the innovative startups, but it's a first attempt to use the definition. But I don't really think that the way it's designed, I mean, it could work for certain programs or for certain regulatory pieces, but at long term, I don't see it being applied for everything. So, and again, this is not like just a discussion for us. For those in the room, I mean, look at SME definition, right? A recommendation. How many times we have seen it being used in different terms, member states complaining, you know, this definition that's work for my market reality and so on and so on. So it's a bit hard to get to definition that is everyone is happy about, but definitely I guess for certain specific programs you need to identify the object that you're addressing those policies to. So it will be useful, but needs to be used with certain caution, and I think needs to be adapted depending on the sector we are using it for. It cannot be like one definition for all kinds of startups because they are very different amongst each other on the industry and of course in the ecosystem they are part of.
Very interesting. I will finalize with Claudio before giving the floor to the audience if someone wants to raise a question. So, so we have a concrete proposal, Claudio, in the report saying that we need to make EU digital wallets the default infrastructure for cross-border interaction, so positioning the European business wallet as the standard channel for business to government services across all member states with full interoperability with the EUDI wallet and the once-only technical system rather than treating them as optional tools for early adopters. So, Claudio, every time we have an initiative on government to government, business to business, which is the perspective that you always bring to the table from the consumer's perspective? For instance, in the case of the business wallet, which will be your thoughts? Because this is a very operational issue, but in practice, it's very strategic at the same time. So it looks like a technical change, a technical adjustment, but actually it has enormous impact on the strategic, on the strategy of the digital single market.
Well, let's just say it's B2B, so that is a bit outside my mandate, so I'm not going to pronounce myself on that. What I can say, though, is reacting to what our previous speakers just said, definitions is key. How we frame the debate is absolutely fundamental, but we need to go down to basics on this. The changes that we are bringing about are not going to change the essentials of the fact that we are still, whether you like it or not, especially on digital, very much a fragmented market. And we do have national markets, in some cases even local. And we can take solid steps towards integration. We can remove barriers to do cross-border operations. We can make decisive steps towards that. Or we can simply try to repeat the same model that got others to dominate the market in the first place, which is somehow believing that the answer to foreign big tech is to grow our own European big tech. So a dominating company, operator, former monopolist or not, incumbent or not, keeping a stranglehold on any market, it is not healthy for said market. It is not healthy for the users, no matter if it's European, if it's Chinese, if it's US. It kills innovation, destroys competition. In the end, everyone loses. We need to have a market that actually believes on what the data is showing us, and which is that when consumers are given a choice, they do prefer privacy-compliant, European values-based companies, which actually put users center and put users first. And that is by definition Europeans. And we have examples from DMA that show that when we remove the tying and bundling, that the companies that have dominated the digital infrastructure for ages, and people are given a choice, they do make a choice towards better models that are more responding to their needs. From the moment that DMA, for instance, got started, browsers is a quick example. Before you had on your phone by default the Safari, or you had by default everyone was using Google Chrome. From the moment the DMA came into power, a small operator like Opera, for instance, jumped 30% in a matter of 1 month in terms of users. Why? Because there is no longer tying in. There's no longer the obligation for consumers to follow just one service because that's what they're exposed to, that's what they're locked in. So you introduce competition in the market, you introduce the possibility that people are exposed to different operators, you give it a level playing field, and that increases the competition, that increases the likelihood that consumers will actually choose European products. If we keep going down the same road, that is to say, is it the member states who are going to choose, as you just said? Is it the commission who's going to choose? How about nobody chooses who's going to be the champions of tomorrow, and we leave it to consumers to do just that by ensuring that the market works fairly and freely for everyone? And there's two things we can do. You talk about sovereignty washing a lot. I also talk a lot about SME washing. There's a lot of that going on in Brussels as well. There's two things you can do. You can change the market by making sure that Europeans are protected from American and Chinese giants by making sure we have rules that keep a level playing field, by making them follow our rules. We've tried that. It was working. Now apparently want to reverse that. And there is by removing barriers to cross-border operations in Europe. We can also do that. But when it comes to making sure that we need to prioritize consumers and giving them the choice to choose better products, that is about a level playing field. That is allowing them to choose the best company that works for them. And we are not seeing that debate right now. We're just not seeing it. And to be honest, I think we're making matters worse, because right now, at least SMEs and startups had a regulatory framework on the digital single market that allowed them some regulatory privileges. Again, we're talking about sovereignty, we're talking about empowering European companies, we're talking about curbing the Americans and the Chinese. But you look at the changes that are in the digital omnibus, on the AI omnibus and the GDPR, what are we seeing? Going back to definitions, so full circle here. The regulatory privilege that were the exception, that were for SMEs and startups alone, are now extended to the small mid-caps. And of course, you say, no, we need to do this because more companies need to have a better position to challenge Americans and Chinese, because sovereignty. But how does that match the fact that the whole idea was supposedly to empower the small SMEs and the startups in Europe and to give them a leg up? How does making the regulatory privileges of a few the rule for everyone, most importantly, non-European companies? And that is the problem we're having now with the rules today. And that's why I started my intervention before saying there is a clear mismatch between the goals we want to achieve and what the proposals to change the rules right now are about. They're not just about creating regulatory uncertainty. They're not just about destroying right now the stability and the consensus we had worked for years. They're producing something way worse, is that we are changing, but we are changing for the worse, and we are changing in a way that will definitely benefit incumbents, dominant players. It will not empower the small operators, small European-based operators. And in the end of the day, you can bring on EU Inc., you can bring on more measures even to curb the barriers here, but the fundamentals of the digital single market at a time where AI is exploding, and what were we talking about? Changing the definition of personal data so it's easier to exploit sensitive data of people without asking them consent first. This is not the direction we're going. This is not the direction of empowering people to make a free choice and reward those operators which are more innovative, more respecting fundamental rights, more respective of privacy, and more innovative. So let's give people the choice and see what happens. Over the past 2 years, I think we should believe a bit more in ourselves and the ability of European companies to do better services and do better products for Europeans to choose.
Okay, good. And now it's 3:10, so in case someone wants to raise their hand, we still have 5 minutes more or less to continue the discussion. Otherwise, I think we could wrap up. But yeah, we have one question there. Yeah.
So I'm really interested because I'm actually a technology provider under the Thank you, Tina. Hi, Ferdinand Burgsdijk here. I'm a EU label recognized data intermediary. So I'm in the startup field trying to do the right thing for Europe here. So indeed, it's completely impossible to get any tangible funding. If there's any funding, it usually goes to the big four that absolutely deliver crap. So listening to all these conversations on the pink Brussels bubble, on where we stand and where we want to go, I'm very happy to hear this discussion as opposed to the previous one, because as a European, I really think we're in the shits. So I'm really curious to, even though I see very good bullet points addressed here, but it's very abstract, it's very far from everyday reality. So if you want to be a well-willed or good-willed European entrepreneur in this field, it's next to impossible. So I understand that usually policy making is a reactive process on what's not going good. Now we're trying to beat the clock. So we're going into a proactive setting. But how can we actually manage to have organizations that are willing to go all the way and to help the European atmosphere and ecosystem to get there? Because currently we're not getting there. All right? We're not being heard, we're not the lobbyists, we're not the guys with the big pockets. Even if you look at tenders, all right, you get requests of at least, say, 3 million euros recurring business over the last 3 years. How, if you just started?
So I'll try my best to address your question, and thank you for bringing a very reality check perspective into the discussion. Look, when it comes to access to opportunities by technological developers that also abide very much to European values, we are experiencing as an organization representing many of them these difficulties on an everyday basis. But that said, when it comes to tenders, when it comes to funding also, and we haven't had the opportunity to touch upon the next multi-annual financial framework and the European Competitiveness Fund in there. Well, you know, introducing a European preference into public procurement tenders and introducing a European preferential approach into the European Competitiveness Fund is one way to, we believe, to reward European players or players, irrespective of the origin, that abide with certain minimum European rules and criteria. And we believe from a sovereignty perspective that these criteria should include as well, for instance, where these companies, where these developers produce their product in terms of, you know, having the research and development, rewarding those that do research and development in Europe, those that store data, that localize data in Europe, thereby by default abiding with European data laws. So in that respect, we believe that there is, and let me maybe indeed turn to Claudio on that, we believe that there is no contradiction between rewarding sovereignty criteria and rewarding those companies that abide with European values and laws, because indeed many of the European-based technological companies already develop their solutions in a user-friendly way, in a GDPR-compliant way, many ways respecting European digital laws already. And I could even, but I will not expand on that, agree that the simplification package is not the single most important measure that is needed for European companies to thrive. We believe industrial policy is much more needed than that. And I could agree that not all the measures included in the simplification package are those that European companies are demanding to thrive and access to cross-border markets. Because if we dismantle, for instance, the provision in the Data Act, we do not do good to European startups and European SMEs that need more access to industrial data in order to develop more secondary market services that actually respond to many needs of the consumers, including, for instance, producing services that expand the life cycle of digital products and hardware. So how to make life easier for European companies? We believe that amending those laws that we have discussed, having a more mission-oriented approach and proactive approach to industrial policy reflected, for instance, in the public procurement laws and the upcoming Public Procurement Act, but also in the European Competitiveness Fund, making sure that European funding does not exacerbate the dependencies that are already there on non-European providers, is going to go in the advantage of those innovators that are based in Europe and that already make the most to deliver services and tools that comply with European values and rules.
Maybe if you can speak for 1-2 minutes so that we can wrap up soon. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to just say reply to Antonio's throw up here, and I just say yes, I completely agree. I think practice what you preach. It's very hard to make the case that somehow we should all go full sovereign and choose European products and buy European, when the public institutions who are driving this process are themselves such renowned clients of across the pond operators. It makes a difficult case indeed. We cannot hide that fact. But also, when we want to go down that road, we have to insist that the best sovereign criteria indeed is the rules we have today. And this is a complete contradiction. If we really want to reward European companies on basis of clear criteria, indeed respecting European values, being a high threshold of protection of personal data and people's privacy, the rules we have today are that best instrument. And that are the best threshold, the best objective requirement in which you can grade, assess, and evaluate companies to decide if they should be awarded or not this kind of role. So at the same time, we're going down this road, we agree, if we really want to make sure that we encourage European companies and reward them for being innovative, but also privacy friendly and personal and fundamental rights friendly and consumer friendly, then we need to make sure that the threshold stays up there and we don't bring it down. Because the moment we bring that one down, you're not favoring the companies that in Europe are already trying to uphold that standard. You're going to favor the ones who never had the standard in the first place. So.
Well, very briefly replying to your question. I think first thing, and I mean looking at an organization like mine, it's about bringing directly the voices of founders to policymakers, because I mean we are here in the middle. I mean, I'm not an expert in all types of companies that I sort of represent in Brussels, so we try as much as possible to engage with founders, going to them and bringing them to interact, or bringing the policymakers to them to interact, so that they can hear the real examples in meetings or in other type of initiatives. I think it's important because looking especially at the startup ecosystem, there's a huge gap knowledge for policymakers when we talk about startups, and about their reality and their business model is not very much understood. Last year we produced a short report, like 12 pages, where we call it Mastering the Startup Journey, just to try to explain people here in Brussels what we're talking about when we're talking about startups. Then there's a huge task for all startup organizations, that is actually to have good data on our ecosystem, so that we have the numbers to show what is being done in Europe on these companies, and so that policymakers can design better policies for them. And finally, there's a point that is a very complex, and I think for all, I mean, the three of us here, that is, it's super hard for the people working in policymaking in Brussels, in institutions, to, I think most of the times they agree on the problems, I mean, and in anything we tell them, but then to go from that to the right solution for the problem. How do you that in that regulation or that directive or that policy, you designed in a way that is efficiently going to solve the problems for these companies in the ground? It's super hard. I think it's already hard for the Commission, even though they have a more like technical expertise on this. And then you have a problem is at the end of the legislative process, you know, the proposal has changed. You don't have an impact assessment on the end of the process. So whatever you end up with at the end and when it's going to be implemented and enforced, sometimes it's a bit far away from the initial objective and goal of the proposal to solve those problems. For us, I have to be pretty honest, for any, I think, at least talking about IFS, it's very hard to try, to sit with policymakers and make sure that whatever is being put in law is actually then on the ground one day addressing the issues of this company. So yeah, it's a very complex reality, but I think it all starts with really talking directly with the founders.
Perfect. So as it's 3:20 p.m., I think that we can wrap up here, but thank you very much for your thoughts. I think that your perspectives are very diverse and also critical, so I'm very happy that you came to the event. And now I will invite Tina from Sitra to wrap up with me. Thank you. So I think that we have had a very complete event, right, with different sensitivities and voices. And I think that for us, this is a call to action. So I think that as you have participated as well in the event, you can share some thoughts.
Thank you, and thank you everybody for great discussion and valuable thoughts. I think one thing what is like very clear to me based on both our report and today's discussion is that the progress will not come from isolated fixes. We need like more systemic diagnosis. But what I would like to highlight is only one point. Our president Alexander Stubb usually have 3 points, but because of limited time and to be very effective, I would highlight 1 point, and that's the implementation. To move from identifying bottlenecks and diagnosis to proper implementation. And the recommendation listed in our report provide a good basis for prioritization and action. But proper impact requires cooperation and coordination, so we need all on board. And our report divided the recommendation into 4 priority areas. So as a next step, I would propose to creating an implementation plan for each priority areas, one at a time.
Fantastic. Well, so thank you very much. And we look, I think that we all agree, and you can wrap up if you want.
So thank you all, and please read our report and reach out if you have any thoughts, any comments, and we'll be in touch in creating this implementation roadmap. Thank you.